I didn't think my pregnancy test would become evidence in a war. I stood in the bathroom at 6 in the morning, barefoot on cold tile, staring at two unmistakable pink lines and trying not to cry too loudly. Alex was still asleep in the other room, one arm flung across my side of the bed like he'd already claimed space in my future, even before he knew what it held. I had lost a baby once before, so this time I didn't scream. I didn't run out with the stick in my hand, laughing or shaking him awake. I just sat on the edge of the bathtub and pressed my palm to my stomach like I was protecting something already fragile from a world that didn't yet know it existed. What I didn't know was this. Somehow, by the time the sun rose, my father-in-law already knew. And instead of congratulations, he came with destruction. A week later, Alex lost $500,000 in one afternoon. Not from a market crash, not from bad code, not from a lawsuit. From his own father, stumbling drunk into a corporate meeting and tearing our reputation apart in front of the people who were supposed to secure our company's future. I watched the deal die in real time. Watched the room stiffen. Watched the humiliation bloom across Alex's face. Watched men who had called him brilliant and trustworthy just days before suddenly avoid his eyes. And in the middle of all of it, there stood Richard, my father-in-law, slurring his words, screaming that Alex abandoned him, crying loudly enough that the security desk froze, unsure whether this was grief, madness, or a performance. It took 3 guards to remove him from the building. By then, our client had already walked. Contract gone, future shaken, trust erased. That night, I sat in our bedroom with the ultrasound photo curled in my fist and realized something terrifying. I wasn't just pregnant. I was pregnant inside a family war that had been brewing for decades. A war built on abandonment, on addiction, on manipulation disguised as love, and on a man who didn't care how many lives he burned down, as long as he could warm himself in the flames. I thought becoming a mother would be about names, nurseries, and lullabies. I didn't know it would begin with restraining orders, surveillance cameras, and a man who shared my husband's blood, but none of his heart, trying to destroy the only future we were trying to build. And the worst part? This wasn't even the beginning. If you'd met us 2 years ago, you wouldn't have seen any of this coming. You'd have seen 2 exhausted software developers sharing a late-night pizza at a cluttered desk, arguing about variable names and UI layouts, laughing over stupid inside jokes about broken build pipelines. You'd have seen my husband as I first saw him, a quiet, brilliant man with a laptop under one arm and the weight of his whole childhood on the other. My name isn't the important part. What matters is this. I write code for a living, and I fell in love with a man who was trying to build a life completely different from the one he was born into. We met at a small tech startup called TechFront Solutions. I was 26 then, still in that stage of my career where a clean merge felt like a personal victory. Alex was new, 31, soft-spoken, hair that refused to stay combed, hoodie slightly too big, like he'd never fully grown into the idea of being taken seriously. The first time I really noticed him was during a project emergency. We had a massive deployment bug at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Half the team was panicking. The client was sending all caps emails, and I was on my 3rd cup of stale office coffee when Alex slid his chair next to mine. "Can I see the error logs?" he asked, voice calm in a way that immediately irritated me. "Be my guest," I muttered, spinning the screen toward him. "Unless you've secretly invented magic, we're screwed." He read in silence for maybe 30 seconds, fingers tapping out a rhythm on the edge of my keyboard. Then he said, "It's not the deployment script, it's the way the tasks are queued. Look, this part here, it's racing itself." I watched as he rewrote a chunk of code I'd been staring at for an hour, his hands steady, his explanations simple. No ego, no condescension, just quiet certainty. When the servers came back up and the client stopped threatening to reevaluate the partnership, everyone cheered. Our manager patted Alex on the shoulder. Someone opened a cheap bottle of Prosecco from the office fridge. Alex just smiled, closed his laptop, and said, "Good teamwork," like we hadn't just watched him single-handedly save the project. I think that was the first time I thought, "Oh, you're different." It took months before I understood why. We started talking more on late nights and early mornings. At first it was about clean architecture, frameworks we hated, the elegance of good documentation. Then, slowly, it turned into real life. He told me about Boston, about growing up in a nice house with a bad foundation, as he put it. His mother, Maria, used to plant roses along the white fence out front. His father, Richard, used to come home in crisp shirts that smelled like expensive cologne and gasoline from the dealership. Then one day, Alex said quietly, he smelled like another woman's perfume instead. He was 6 when Richard packed his bags. No fight, no dramatic storm out the door, just a man with a suitcase and a speech about finding himself. Maria went from stay-at-home mom to 3-job survivor practically overnight. Morning waitress, afternoon receptionist, weekend cleaning jobs. Their pretty house in the suburbs turned into a line item on a bank document. They moved into a cramped apartment in a neighborhood where the sirens never really stopped. That must have been awful, I said once, tracing the rim of my coffee cup while he talked. He shrugged, the way people do when they've learned to minimize their own pain. It was loud, he said, inside and outside. The quiet part of his story lived with his grandmother, Patricia. She lived a few blocks away, a retired teacher with sharp eyes and soft hands. She watched him after school, fed him grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally, and taught him how to love questions more than answers. She bought me my first programming book when I was 12, he told me, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Said if I was going to spend all day on a computer, I might as well learn how to talk back to it. Richard, meanwhile, became a ghost with a schedule. He appeared for birthdays sometimes, holidays if it was convenient. He arrived in shiny cars that didn't match the child support receipts Maria kept in a shoebox under her bed. At 14, he took me to this expensive restaurant, Alex said once, staring at the monitor like he was looking through it. Spent an hour talking about himself. His car, his job, his new life in California. I don't think he asked me one question about school. Did you tell him you got into MIT? I asked. He found out later, Alex replied. From a Facebook post. He texted me 3 days after graduation, said he was caught up with work. So when you ask me why Alex pours himself into work the way he does, why he double-checks everything, why he hates owing people favors, why loyalty is almost a sacred word to him, that's why. TechFront became our shared escape hatch. 2 years in, he turned to me after yet another frustrating sprint review and said, almost casually, "What if we just built something ourselves and did it right from the start?" I laughed at first. Then he opened his notebook. DevStream was born on a whiteboard and a shared sense of stubbornness. We emptied savings accounts. My parents invested what they could. We worked out of our tiny apartment, our office being a cheap desk wedged between the kitchen and the living room. We lived on instant noodles, supermarket rotisserie chicken, and the occasional guilty takeout when a deployment actually went smoothly. There were nights when I cried in the shower from sheer exhaustion. There were mornings when I woke up to find Alex already at the computer, eyes red, muttering, "Just one more test, sweet." But then the code started to sing. Our algorithm, the thing that would eventually make DevStream worth noticing, clicked into place after one brutal 72-hour weekend. We watched as it streamlined project flows in a way nothing else on the market could. We got our first real client, then a second. Then we moved into a cramped but official office space and hired employees who believed in us. That's when local business blogs started calling Alex a self-made success. And that's when Richard finally showed up again. He walked into our glass-walled office unannounced one afternoon, older and crumpled, eyes wet, voice shaking with regret. "Alex," he said, arms already outstretched, "I'm so proud of you, son. I'm so, so proud. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I want to make things right." I stood in the corner of our little office, one hand on my laptop, watching my husband stare at the man who had abandoned him, and watching hope rise in his eyes despite everything he'd told me. I knew then, this wasn't just a reunion. This was the beginning of a test, and none of us knew how high the stakes would get. At first, Richard looked small. Not physically, he was still a tall man with broad shoulders, but emotionally, he entered Alex's life like someone who knew he was walking into borrowed space. He cried easily, apologized often, spoke softly like the volume of his voice could rewrite the past. And for a while, it worked. Alex gave him coffee, time, careful hope. Richard told us he'd been downsized, that the dealership had let him go without warning, that rent was overdue and his wife, Laura, needed expensive medical treatment for diabetes. He talked about bills piling up, medical paperwork he didn't quite understand, doctors who refused to wait. I watched Alex absorb every word like it was personal responsibility. "He's still my dad," he said one night as we sat on the edge of our bed, shoes kicked into a messy pile by the door. "He's always messed up, but he's not evil. He's just broken." Broken people, I thought, still know where they step. The first money he gave Richard was small, a few $100s, just to get through the week. Then rent 1 month, Then groceries until Laura's insurance kicked in. Then a hospital bill that came printed on paper that looked just real enough to be convincing. I didn't argue at first. Who fights a sick woman? Who challenges a man who cries about his own failure? But slowly, the pattern changed. Richard started coming by without calling. He'd show up at our office with cheap coffee and warm nostalgia. "You remember how you used to ride on my shoulders at the zoo?" he'd say, eyes glistening. "You always loved the giraffes." Alex would smile faintly, but later admit to me in quiet confusion, "I don't remember any zoo." Then the guilt would come. "I hate asking you," Richard would say, always right before doing exactly that. "You've done more than you ever should have. You don't owe me anything." And then he'd ask anyway, for small business loans that weren't really loans, for car repairs that never seemed to end, for just enough to get me back on my feet. DevStream started doing well right around the same time Richard's life started going wrong. Funny how that works. He wanted to invest in a food truck. "I've always dreamed of working for myself," he said, hands clasped tightly like he was praying. "I just need a little help to start." Alex said yes. He wanted money for marketing, for permits, for unexpected costs. Alex said yes. Every time the money left our account, something in my chest tightened. Not because we couldn't afford it, but because nothing about Richard improved afterward. No new truck, no updates, no progress. Just another crisis. And every crisis somehow ended with Richard standing in front of us, eyes wet, hand out. The real shift happened the day he asked for $200,000. I was sitting at our kitchen counter with my laptop open when Richard dropped that number into the air like it was a grocery total. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," he said. "High return, minimal risk. I've seen the paperwork." "Can we see it?" I asked calmly. His eyes flashed just for half a second. Then he laughed, loud, fake. Of course, I just don't have it on me right now. But don't you trust your own father, Alex?" Alex hesitated. I'd never seen him hesitate over money before. Not once. "Dad," he said slowly, "I just need details, a plan, something in writing." Richard's face changed. The softness vanished. "Unbelievable," he snapped. "After everything I've been through, after everything I've lost, even my own son treats me like some kind of criminal." That night, Alex didn't sleep. I watched him stare at the ceiling like hope had finally turned into suspicion, and he didn't know which one hurt more. When he said no the next morning, Richard didn't cry. He didn't beg. He didn't hide. He smiled. And within a week, our phones started ringing. Old investors, colleagues, business acquaintances, all asking the same quiet question. "Is everything okay with DevStream?" We lost 3 clients in 10 days. One by one, meetings canceled. Contracts carefully paused. Emails filled with polite uncertainty. Then we heard the rumors that Alex had stolen intellectual property, that DevStream was about to fold, that he manipulated investors, that the company was built on lies. Every lie traced back to the same mouth, Richard's. And then I found out I was pregnant. And suddenly the danger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was inside my body. I hadn't told anyone, not even Alex yet. I wanted to be sure. After last time, I needed to be sure. But somehow, Richard found out. And instead of congratulations, he came with leverage. "I just want to be near my grandchild," he said sweetly over the phone. "I think you owe me that much." I hung up shaking. Because something inside me knew this man wasn't asking anymore. He was collecting. There are moments in life when you feel the impact before you fully understand it. Like hearing glass shatter in another room, like watching someone fall in slow motion, like standing in the doorway when a building alarm goes off and realizing you're already too late. The morning of the meeting, I woke up with that sensation pressing against my ribs. The client had flown in from Chicago, a healthcare conglomerate that could single-handedly change the future of DevStream. We'd spent months coding demos, weeks refining projections, nights rehearsing answers. This wasn't just a contract. This was survival. Alex kissed my forehead before he left. "You okay?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Just nervous. It's a big day." I didn't tell him about the pregnancy yet. Not that morning. I wanted the meeting over first. "Text me after," I whispered. "I'll text you before," he smiled. "Either way." By noon, I was already in the lobby of our office building, waiting with a tablet full of financial projections and a heart that wouldn't calm down. The conference room upstairs had floor-to-ceiling glass and a view of the city that made everything feel possible. The client arrived right on time, 5 suited executives with polite smiles and professional handshakes. Alex started the presentation flawlessly. Demos ran clean. Figures made sense. I watched their body language shift from guarded to interested. This was it. Then the elevator doors opened behind us. The sound came first. A voice. Too loud, too slurred, too familiar. Alex! The room went silent. I didn't turn around at first. I already knew. Richard staggered in like he owned the place. His jacket hung loose, his eyes were glassy, his breath had that sour, sweet edge that meant alcohol hadn't just passed through him. It was still inside him. Alex, you can't just ignore me, he barked. I moved instinctively toward my husband, like my body itself had decided where home was. What is he doing here? One of the executives whispered. Richard leaned against the conference table, steadying himself with a hand that shook. You abandon your own father when he's sick? He slurred. When he needs you? Dad, Alex said quietly, trying to control the room. You need to leave. Richard laughed, a loud, cracked sound that made his throat work too hard. Leave. I helped build you. I gave you life. And now you're too important to pick up the phone. He turned to the clients with a dramatic flourish. Do you know who you're doing business with? Every muscle in my body locked. Richard straightened, just enough to perform. This boy lies, steals ideas, cheats people. You think his company is real? Look at him. He turns his back on blood. You think he won't turn on you? The silence in the room thickened. I saw our contract die on their faces. Alex stepped forward. Dad, stop, he snapped. You're drunk. Richard whirled on him. So what if I am? I lost everything because you walked away from me. That's not true, Alex shouted. You walked away from me. That was when security arrived. 2 guards entered, calm but firm. Sir, you need to come with us. Richard resisted. Of course he did. He flailed, shouted, cried. My son is killing me, he screamed. He's killing his own father. I watched strangers drag away the man who had just detonated Alex's life, and I felt something inside my stomach twist with fear I had never known before. Not for the business, not for the money, for the tiny heartbeat inside me that didn't yet understand that the world we were bringing it into had already turned hostile. When Richard disappeared through the doors, none of the executives looked at Alex again. The lead partner cleared his throat. We appreciate your time. She didn't meet my eyes when she spoke. We think it's best to reassess this partnership. Alex tried to salvage it, to explain, to apologize, to breathe life back into something that had been publicly suffocated. But they were already gone. I stood there in the empty glass room afterward, watching our future slide out the door with them, and realized the truth. Richard had succeeded. He hadn't just embarrassed Alex, he had hunted him. And this was only the first kill. We didn't speak on the ride home. Not because we had nothing to say, but because every word felt like it might collapse something fragile inside us. Alex drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw locked so tight I could see the muscle in his cheek twitching. The city blurred past the windshield, lights smearing into color with no shape, like everything we had built had suddenly lost definition. When we got into the apartment, Alex dropped his keys onto the counter like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I should have known, he said quietly. I hung my coat with shaking hands. I should have stopped him earlier. I watched his shoulders fold inward, just a little, and I hated Richard all over again for knowing exactly where to aim. Alex paced the living room, running a hand through his hair over and over like he could scrub out the day. He humiliated us, he whispered, in front of them, in front of the whole building. I stepped in front of him. This is not your fault. He shook his head. He wouldn't have been there if I hadn't let him back in. I should have cut him off the first time he touched our accounts. I waited. Let him breathe. Then I said the sentence I'd been holding since morning. I'm pregnant. The word landed between us like something alive. Alex froze. What? I reached into my purse and pulled out the test I'd wrapped in tissue like it might bruise. His eyes dropped to it slowly. Then his face broke open. He crossed the space between us in 2 steps and cupped my face with both hands. We're having a baby, he whispered. My voice shook. If everything goes right, yes. He didn't breathe. Not for a second. Then he crushed me into his chest. Arms wrapped so tight I felt his heart against my cheek like a drum. We stood there like that for a long time, 2 people trying to believe in something gentle, after something brutal. Then reality came back, softly at first, then like a slap. Alex pulled away slowly. My dad did this today, he murmured. I nodded. He didn't know, I said, but somehow he knew enough. We sat on the floor against the couch, shoulders touching, the silence filled with too much future all at once. What if he doesn't stop? Alex asked. The question was barely louder than his breath. I closed my eyes. I think, I said carefully, today was just what he was willing to do in public. The confession dropped into the room like a warning. We talked for hours. About security, about money, about whether DevStream could survive this, about whether Richard would escalate. And then Alex said something that cracked the last piece of denial inside me. He doesn't want to hurt me, he said. He wants to control me. I felt it in my bones. Control disguised as need. Sabotage disguised as love. Manipulation disguised as family. And then the text came. After another. Numbers we didn't recognize. Screenshots sent by colleagues. Rumors forwarded by investors. Richard hadn't just made a scene. He had planned it. Alex stared at his phone until the screen dimmed. My own father, he whispered. He didn't come to that meeting to tell the truth. He looked up at me. He came to make sure no one ever trusted me again. I slid my hand into his. And for the first time, he didn't pull away. The collapse didn't come suddenly. It came in waves. Quiet ones at first. Emails that went unanswered. Calls that ended with rehearsed sympathy. Meetings postponed indefinitely. In just 3 weeks, our calendar emptied itself like someone was erasing us in real time. What Richard took with one drunken entrance, he kept stealing in whispers. Alex stopped sleeping. He developed the kind of insomnia that lives behind the eyes, where exhaustion doesn't bring rest, only a buzzing that never goes quiet. He'd lie beside me in the dark, staring at the ceiling, while my body focused on growing a life inside me, and his focused on losing everything outside. I can't believe I did this to us, he whispered one night. I rolled onto my side and pressed his hand to my stomach. You didn't, I said. He did. But the words weren't enough, because Richard wasn't finished. 2 weeks after the meeting, Richard started showing up. Not dramatically. Not during business hours. He came early. Before sunrise. Before work. Before we were fully awake. The first time I saw him through the window, I thought it was a shadow. Then the shadow moved. I stood in the kitchen gripping my mug, watching a man who had no right to our life stand beneath it. When Alex opened the door, Richard looked pathetic. Cold. Tired. Like a man who'd slept in his car. I just want to talk, he said. Alex didn't let him inside. Whatever you came to say it from there. Richard smiled without warmth. I heard you're going to be a father, he said. I dropped my mug. Coffee splashed across my bare feet, hot enough to sting. We told no one, I whispered. Richard's eyes flicked behind Alex's shoulder. Right to me. Congratulations, he said. No warmth, no joy. Just information. I didn't feel pregnant for the first time that day. I felt exposed. Richard began appearing everywhere. Our office parking lot, the bakery on our corner, the sidewalk outside my doctor's office. Sometimes he didn't speak. He would just stand and watch. When he did speak, it came like poison and sugar. You know I could help again, he told Alex one afternoon, standing far too close. All this trouble started after you said no. You really think your investors would trust you again if I told them you'd reconciled with your father? Alex didn't respond. He just clenched his jaw and walked away. That was when the fake accounts started. People messaged Alex asking why he was promoting urgent investment opportunities. We hadn't posted a thing. Our lawyer showed us what Richard had done. He'd cloned our business website, made fake emails, pretended to be Alex. Clients began calling us furious, some embarrassed, others furious about money they hadn't even sent yet. All of them confused, all of them damaged. Richard didn't just want revenge. He wanted to wear Alex's face. I started waking up sick, nauseous from stress more than pregnancy. My doctor ordered bed rest. Your blood pressure is too high, she said gently. Your body thinks it's fighting a threat. She wasn't wrong. The threat sat in my husband's bloodline. Then Laura reached out. Instead of anger, instead of demands, she asked for a meeting. Just me and her, at a small cafe near our house. I told Alex everything. He hated the idea. But I went, because something in her voice sounded broken. She didn't scream. She didn't blame. She cried. Then she told me the truth about Richard. The thing Alex had never known. Richard wasn't desperate. He was addicted. Gambling. Hotels. Debit cards. Accounts maxed out in her name. Homes lost. Years erased by bets he never won. She has diabetes, Richard had said. Laura shook her head. I don't, she whispered. I have debt and a husband who lies. Then came the siblings. The ones Alex never knew existed. Michael, Sophia. Other children Richard had abandoned and returned to. The same way. Money, promises, manipulation. They cut him off. Years ago. We were just late. And then, Richard crossed the last line. At 2 a.m, we woke to alarms. Lights. Sirens. Alex grabbed a baseball bat and ran downstairs. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, one hand on my stomach, listening to the sound of metal scraping against wood outside. The police arrived before he got in. They found him in our backyard, drunk, holding a crowbar, and in his jacket, printouts of our routines. photos of my body, and ultrasound images of my child. Richard wasn't just watching us anymore. He was studying us. The night Richard was arrested, our house didn't feel like shelter anymore. It felt like something had been broken into that couldn't be replaced. After the police left and the alarms finally stopped screaming, Alex and I just stood in the hallway, wrapped in the weird blue light of our security system, like ghosts in our own home. Neither of us sat. Neither of us spoke. I stared at the back door, the one Richard had been trying to force open, and imagined what would have happened if the alarm hadn't triggered, if the camera hadn't caught him, if the crowbar had found its way inside. My legs finally shook enough that Alex had to catch me. "I can't do this," I whispered into his shirt. "I can't raise a child in a house someone tried to break into." He held me like he was afraid I'd disappear. "We won't," he murmured. "I promise you." But promises don't lock doors. The next days were worse. Not because more happened, but because nothing did. Silence can be terrifying when it's unnatural. Richard didn't call. He didn't drive by. He didn't ruin anything else. That scared me more than his chaos ever had, because obsession doesn't end quietly. And sure enough, 2 days later, the package arrived. No return address. No warning. Alex froze when he saw it. He knew. We opened it together at the kitchen counter. Inside were the things Richard had taken from us. Alex's grandfather's watch. The childhood photo album, folded neatly beneath them. A letter. 8 pages, front and back, written in a handwriting Alex knew too well. Richard described every moment of Alex's life like he owned it. The day he was born, every girlfriend, every breakup, every perceived rejection. And then he described me, not as a person, but as an obstacle. He wrote about his right to Alex, about how I changed him, about how his life didn't make sense without his son in it. He admitted without shame that he'd broken into our home, that he'd researched lockpicking online, that he'd followed our routines, that he knew where we went every weekend. He wrote that he'd taken Alex's things not to steal them, but to feel close. I dropped the letter. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Alex," I whispered. "He's been inside our bedroom." Alex broke down. Not dramatically, not loudly, just silently, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. "I was supposed to protect you," he said through tears. "I was supposed to protect our baby." I sat beside him. Neither of us tried to pretend we were brave. That night, I slept with the lights on. I checked the locks 3 times before lying down. I flinched at every car passing outside. I pressed my palms to my stomach and whispered apologies to a child who hadn't yet learned what fear tasted like. For the first time, I wasn't afraid for our business. I wasn't afraid for money. I was afraid for existence, for safety, for tomorrow. Because what do you do when the person trying to destroy your life is blood? The police didn't arrest Richard because of our fear. They arrested him because of paper, evidence, ink, photos, serial patterns. Legally, emotions don't count, but handwriting does. The next morning, Alex's lawyer didn't waste time. We handed over the letter. Every screenshot, every camera clip, every voicemail, all of it, stacked, counted, organized. Our fear became a file. 2 days later, Richard was in handcuffs again, not outside our house, but inside his own. The charge wasn't harassment. It was breaking and entering, a felony. When the police searched his apartment, they found dozens of photos of Alex taken without his knowledge, schedules written by hand, maps, receipts, tickets from places we'd gone together. He hadn't been watching us casually. He'd been cataloging us. There were binders. I wish I were exaggerating. There were binders, each labeled with dates like a diary someone else never agreed to be part of. The officer's voice was steady when he told us, but mine wasn't. I had to sit down, my stomach cramping from shock. Our baby rolling inside me, like it sensed something violent had been unsettled. The next blow came quietly. Medical reports, psychiatric evaluations. Richard wasn't just cruel, he was unwell. Diagnoses words didn't soften. Compulsive gambling disorder, attachment-related personality disturbances, chronic deception patterns. The lawyer didn't celebrate that. He looked at us calmly and said, "This explains his behavior. It doesn't excuse it." At the hearing, I was allowed to speak. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I shook. But I spoke. I told the judge what it felt like to not lock your door and know you were safe. I told him what it felt like to realize someone had stood in your bedroom while you slept. I told him what it felt like to carry a child inside you and wonder if your own bloodline had become a threat. Alex spoke last. He didn't talk about money. He talked about childhood, about absence, about trying to love a man who never showed up for him, about what it felt like to finally realize this was never a father-son relationship. This was a hostage situation. Richard didn't look at us. He stared at the floor. When the judge spoke, I held Alex's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. 6 months jail, 2 years probation, mandatory treatment, no contact. The gavel fell, and with it, our waiting ended. 3 weeks later, I gave birth to our son. We named him Nathan. He arrived quiet, peaceful, like he wasn't in a hurry to arrive into a world that had just finished shaking. When they placed him in my arms, something unclenched inside me. For the first time in months, the danger wasn't the first thing I felt. It was love. The world did not snap back into place after Richard was sentenced. It shifted, slowly, unevenly, like a blown tree trying to relearn how to stand. Alex and I left the hospital with Nathan wrapped in layers too big for his tiny body and eyes that looked like they were still deciding whether this place was worth staying in. The first night home, neither of us slept, not out of fear, out of constant checking. Monitors, doors, windows. We learned that safety isn't a switch. It's a muscle, and ours had been weak for longer than we realized. DevStream didn't bounce back either. Not magically, not easily. The company limped. Clients hesitated. And investors, even when sympathetic, were cautious. Reputation doesn't heal the way bone does. It fractures quietly. Alex held meetings while bouncing Nathan in one arm. I took calls while pumping milk. We worked through exhaustion with hands that rarely stopped shaking. Then, slowly, some clients returned, one at a time, like people testing a bridge after a collapse. Our transparency helped. So did Alex's refusal to pretend anything had been neat. He told the truth, not dramatically, not emotionally, factually. This happened. This is what we did. This is how we protected our company. And people listened. Not all, but enough. The contract we lost that day with Richard in the lobby never came back. $500,000 doesn't forget. But a healthcare startup from Seattle came instead. Smaller, but real. And we took it. Richard, meanwhile, began losing everything the law allows a man to lose. Slowly. Laura left, filed paperwork, packed her life into boxes. She called me once from the airport. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. I believed her. She wasn't him. Michael and Sophia stayed. They flew in, held our son, cried in our kitchen, shared memories no one should have had to survive. And for the first time, Alex wasn't the only abandoned child in the room. Richard's old friends vanished, some in quiet ways, some loudly. No one stands beside a man when headlines read, "Break-in, stalking, fraud," especially not when photos of binders and stolen lives start circulating online. 2 of Alex's college friends chose Richard's side. They said jail was cruel. That illness deserved compassion. That family deserved forgiveness. Alex didn't argue. He simply let them go. People who excuse violence, he told me one night, will never understand safety. Money drained. Security systems were installed. Cameras turned our house into a soft-lit fortress. Alex spent over $3,000 making wooden doors feel like steel. New locks, new address, new routines, new phone numbers. We erased ourselves from the map Richard once followed. When Richard was released early for good behavior, I felt it in my body before I saw it in ink. 4 months instead of 6. The no-contact order stayed. He was moved out of state into his parents' home. His life folded tighter and tighter until even his shadow seemed boxed in. He sent one letter to Alex's parents' house. Apologetic, scripted, regretful. We opened it together. We didn't answer. Silence was the boundary. People think endings arrive with noise, with certainty, with fireworks, with a dramatic final scene that tells you it's over. But this ending arrived quietly, in a new apartment with thicker doors, in a nursery painted soft gray instead of white, in a baby monitor glowing on my nightstand like a second moon. It arrived in mornings where no one was waiting outside, in emails that were only about work again, in a phone that stopped lighting up with unknown numbers. Normal finally returned, not as something loud, but as something gentle. Alex changed jobs 3 months after Richard's sentencing. He didn't announce it, he just let go. He wanted a workplace that had never heard Richard's name, didn't know our history, and didn't associate our future with our trauma. When he came home that first evening from his new job, he looked lighter. "I think," he said quietly while rocking Nathan, "I finally feel unemployed from my childhood." We moved in together completely. No more split spaces, no more waiting rooms between us. Our life became smaller in the best way. Fewer people, fewer obligations. Fewer performances. Just us, just home. Couples therapy became part of our routine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't urgent anymore. It was maintenance, like brushing teeth, like changing locks. like teaching your nervous system that tomorrow might actually be okay. The therapist never asked us to forgive. She never told Alex he needed to understand his father. She told us something better. Closure isn't reconciliation, it's release. And little by little, we did. I stopped flinching at footsteps outside. Alex stopped apologizing for things that weren't his fault. Nathan learned how to laugh. Really laugh. The deep belly kind that reminds you life is stubborn in the face of pain. We still checked Richard's probation expiry date. Not obsessively, just realistically. We built a safety plan for afterwards. Not because we were afraid, because we were mature. We had learned this the hard way. Hope without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction. Richard never contacted us again. He faded into another state, another life, another version of himself that didn't involve us. And that was enough. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Just enough. 6 months ago, Alex stood in our living room with a ring in his shaking hand and asked me, softly, almost like he was afraid to disturb the life we finally had, if I would keep building this future with him. I said yes before he finished the sentence, because the truth is, we didn't survive this because we were strong. We survived it because we became strong together. This story didn't teach me that family forgives no matter what. It taught me that family protects. That blood does not outrank safety. That love does not come with ultimatums. That being pregnant doesn't make you fragile. It makes you fierce. That someone being broken does not obligate you to bleed for them. And most of all, that the most powerful word in any relationship is not forever. It's enough. Enough lies, enough harm, enough chances. Enough. If you're living inside a story that feels familiar, if someone has dressed control up as care, if you've been told you're cruel for wanting peace, hear me. You're not dramatic. You're not heartless. You're not overreacting. You're finally listening. And that is where every real ending begins.